If you've just tuned in, you're listening to Real Talk Texas on AM 570 KLIF. You're always welcome to contact me, your host, Steve Hakes, at realtalktexas.com. That's realtalktexas.com. This morning, we've had the honor of having in our studio here live with us, we've got Stacey and Linda of Détente Collaborative Mediation to help really help people out during a desperate time of need for counsel, and that is at the end or separation of a marriage that both spouses were committed to. And we've talked to them a little bit today about just the unique approach that this collaborative mediation, and that, my understanding, they're one of the only firms in Texas that's doing this, helping people early on in the process to come to some agreements to call a ceasefire and really sit down and do what's best for them and their families. And it seems like it should be very successful. Stacey and Linda, what is your success rate when you have people come in?
Our success rate hovers between 95 and 97%.
Wow.
And that in comparison, most people need to understand that the traditional mediation success rate in Texas is between 80 and 85%. Nationally, the success rate for collaborative law is 86%. So we have boosted that a full 10 to 15%.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I really think it's because they're combining the skills of an attorney who's giving legal information, not legal advice, and the amazing skills of Linda, who can be a communication facilitator. Because when people can sit down and talk together, they can reach their own agreements, but they just need some help.
And they're getting a little help to deal with the emotions, but more importantly, they're able to look at what their interests are. Because it's not uncommon for people to come to us and somebody to say, I've just got to keep this house. But they haven't considered what the costs are, or what's really important to them about keeping the house is that they want the kids to stay in the same school district. So we help them look at what about that is important to you. And one of our mediation sessions is actually about looking at their interest and what goal development and what's important to them. We call it our goals and interest session, where they can sit down and think about, what do you want your life to look like after this? What's really important to you? Instead of coming in with, I want the china cabinet and I want the house and I have to have this much time with my child.
And my mother gave me that.
Right. Oftentimes people come in with, I want this and I want that. And instead of us starting there, we sit down and talk about, tell us what's important to you about that, and help them talk to one another about what's important to me about that is. And when we uncover those interests, then they're able to make decisions that fit their family. And I think that's part of why we've been more successful, because there's not another process that really gives a lot of time and attention to what's important to them. And so people are much more likely to agree to things that they're comfortable with. We don't want anybody making agreements for something that they don't think that they can live with. So by the time our folks make agreements before Stacey turns it into a mediated settlement agreement, they know exactly why they've made these particular decisions, and they've had all the information, and they've looked at all the pros and cons of whether or not, if they come in and say, I want the house, they've looked at all the costs. They've possibly consulted with a financial professional as a neutral who can tell them about, or someone who can tell them about tax consequences, or perhaps a mortgage person who can tell them about qualifying or not qualifying, and where's the other spouse going to live, because now we have one income supporting two houses and still raising children.
And there also is available a parenting specialist to help the families understand what's going to happen when somebody moves out. How is that going to affect my children? And one part of the divorce process is to establish a parenting plan. And that means that the mom and dad are trying to decide how to best spend time with their children. And so we have that other resource for them as well. And I think because of the resource network we have, including someone like you, Steve, who knows the mortgage industry well, we can help them gather enough information that they can really make well-informed decisions. And that's what makes the settlement rate so high.
So what I hear you saying is that you're not going to sit down with each spouse and say, okay, here's the money and here's what your budget should look like. You're going to turn that over or suggest a financial professional. And I know, Stacey, you've sent people to me, and I've tried to help them in that fashion, and especially when it comes to the divorce. But we really look at the full financial picture for any of our customers, and that's just part of what we do in my office.
And that's empowering for them, Steve, because we as mediators and Linda as a communication specialist, we don't suggest what the answers are for them. And we can't make the decisions for them. We cannot impose our judgment. But when they have enough information and they know what's important to them, they can evaluate whether their choices are going to meet those goals and interests. And that's really the difference. Because if you go down to the courthouse, the judge makes those decisions for you. And most people, they need to know that the traditional settlement rate is 96 to 98% of all the cases ever filed in court. Why is that? Because they get down there and they realize, oh, this judge is going to make a decision for me, and it's now I've lost control. So in our process, they keep control. They work on all of this information early. They know what it's going to take to run a household. They're fully informed. So they make very good decisions that tend to be more enduring because they've thought about them completely before they get there.
And how, in your personal experience, Linda and Stacey, really, for past customers, past clients that have worked with you, do you guys follow up with them and see how things are going, or do they reach back to you and say, I'm so glad I went through this process, or it seems to me like there would be a better relationship after the divorce because we kind of came to an agreement rather than my attorney fighting for me and your attorney fighting for you, and then the judge saying, okay, this is what I think, and this is what it's going to be.
Couples who have experienced antagonistic divorces, either from their parents or their friends, really see the value of what we're doing. In fact, sometimes people select us because they'll say, my parents had a horrible divorce, and I don't want to do this to my children. And so they really see the value. It just makes a lot of sense to them to sit down and work things out. We do ask for client feedback after they have completed their mediation process, and we get some pretty positive feedback on that. We're also always growing our process. So the other thing we ask for in our client feedback is, what could we do to help you better? Because we're all about serving their needs.
And this is a fairly new process. How long have you guys been doing this?
Well, I've been working on the collaborative mediation idea for about the last 5 years. It really has been the last 2 years, 2+ years we've been doing it actively with clients in the family arena.
So the average person out there probably doesn't even know this exists.
That's correct. And they really need to understand that there are other options out there besides just going to divorce lawyers. And there are people, who need divorce lawyers. Absolutely. They do. And I'm a lawyer myself, and I'm not lawyer bashing. It's for the people who really want to try to do it themselves and have that great desire to save their family money and worry and stress on the children. Those are the kind of folks who come to us directly.
Yeah, and speaking that you're an attorney, you remember that you've been voted to the best lawyers in America list in 2012 and for 2013. And I just, I feel like there's at the end of the road, when everything's settled up, what I like to share with the audience, and if you're listening right now and you feel like they're talking to you and you really need to reach out and get some help, and you're at that point in the road where you need that, please contact us at realtalktexas.com. That's realtalktexas.com. Just hit the contact button, send me a quick note, and I'll get you in touch with Stacey and Linda, and hopefully we can do a service and help our listeners as well by providing this information. So one of the things I wanted to talk about too is in working with you, Stacey and Linda, is there are points in the road where say the assets have been divided. Everybody's agreed that one spouse is going to stay in the house, the other one's moving out, and they were joint on that mortgage when they bought the house. And one of the things, a mortgage professional that I am, I get this quite frequently throughout the year where I'll pull credit on someone and they'll say, well, I was divorced 5-10 years ago, But it doesn't matter. We have a house. He still has the house, or she still has the house. But that shouldn't affect me because the judge said, I gave up the house. And I'll give you a really good example. I had a nurse come into my office in the last 6 months, and she didn't even mention that she ever owned a house because in her mind, she never had the house. So I pulled her credit, and I saw that, there was a mortgage on there that had gone past due. It had been almost foreclosed on, and the ex-husband had done a deed in lieu of foreclosure. And with all of the new tightening of guidelines, trying to get an approval on that loan for that spouse became very, very difficult. In fact, we were declined because that was on her credit. And she said, "Well, that's impossible." The judge said, that's not my house anymore. I went back to the Philippines for 2 years. I was out of the country when that happened. I don't even remember. It was in 2006, so we're almost in the underwriting guidelines for Fannie Mae are 7 years after an event like that before you can get a new mortgage. And that was still on her credit report. So fortunately, at Affiliated Bank, we have a Make Sense mortgage, and I was able to place her in that Make Sense mortgage, even though Fannie Mae would not buy the loan. We put her on our bank program, got her in the house because it made sense. She had assets, she had 10% down, she had another 6 months of reserves in the bank. She was financially sound. Her credit score was actually very good. So it was a make sense to me, and I recommended that we do the loan, and the bank approved that loan. And so we have her in the house. And after the 1 year passes, or 1.5 years, when that drops off of her credit report, then we'll just modify that loan into a permanent loan. We put them on an ARM program, so it's a temporary loan. I call it kind of a place to sit while we get everything fixed up, but you still got into the house that you were all excited about, and that's a great thing that I can provide for those situations. But it's very interesting, and it's been that way. I've been in the business 14 years, and I've had this conversation time and time again about when you're separating the assets, you need to, if you can afford to stay in the house and you can afford that mortgage on your own, then you need to do a refinance and take one spouse off of it so we don't run into this later on. And so that husband or wife that kept the house has that solely in their name. And it's, even though the other one's not on deed, the bank doesn't really care what the judge said. Bank says, you both said you'd pay me back, and that's what we expect.
And that's absolutely the same thing on joint credit cards. Doesn't matter who the judge gives that debt to. It's a contractual debt. If your name's on that contract with that credit card company, they're coming after you too. So in our process, we would not have the situation that happened with that lady. It would be taken care of.
So you really understand the value, Steve, of people sitting down before they get into that situation and understanding what the ramifications of all their decisions could possibly mean to them down the road. And so they're able to avoid those difficult situations because they get your help before they're in that situation.
Well, I really want to thank you, Stacey and Linda, for coming in. Again, if you've listened to this, you're listening to Real Talk Texas.